Well, today, Senator Ted Cruz is receiving a little help from his colleagues in the Senate. Former candidates and senators Marco Rubio and Lindsey say a Trump nomination would be disastrous and that Cruz is the best man for the job.
But will these endorsements help Ted Cruz catch up to Donald Trump? Cruz currently trails Trump by more than 250 delegates. Face the Nation moderator and CBS News political director John Dickerson is here with us to break it down, fresh off the CTM set. John, good to see you.
That's right. I'm happy to be here.
All right. So these endorsements, we've seen them before for candidates. They haven't helped much. Can they help Cruz here?
Yes, you remember what the endorsements did for Marco Rubio. What it does is it grabs a little bit of the news cycle for Ted Cruz and confirms in people's mind this argument that he is the alternative to Donald Trump, which is going to matter in the delegate fight. The game here is to deny Trump delegates, the 1,237, before he gets to the Cleveland convention. And so this could marginally help with that, but in the main, no. It's going to require Ted Cruz to prosecute this case against Donald Trump and John Kasich to do the same.
You know, there's been a lot of talk going on about just what this is doing to the impression that voters will have of the Republican Party. Is it damaging the image of the Republican Party? And I think when you see, you know, Lindsey Graham say, I'm holding a fundraiser for him, and literally in the same interview he says, you know, he's not really the best choice. He's not really my preference. When you hear Marco Rubio say, well, he's the only real conservative left, but not like, and so I'm backing him 100%. I wonder what sort of impact this is having on the American public, the voters who were already, you know, not so crazy about the candidates that are available to them.
Well, I think in terms of the reputation of the Republican Party, the bigger threat to that is Donald Trump, in the large sense, and that's what worries people like Rubio and Graham, who are backing Cruz, because they worry that if Donald Trump is the nominee, it will destroy the party. But you're right, these tepid endorsements.
And flip-floppy.
But, you know, it's tepid on both sides. If you heard Dr. Ben Carson talk about his endorsement of Donald Trump, he said, well, I would have liked other alternatives, but those alternatives aren't available. And if he's not a very good president, well, it'll only be 4 years. So on both well, in all the instances, although nobody's weighing in about John Kasich, which is its own condemnation, because the fact that he's not being talked about is sort of all you need to know. So yeah, it's a where it really comes home is that nobody's very enthusiastic about any of these, which except for those where the real energy in the party is behind Donald Trump. And if you compare the anti-Trump movement to the Trump movement has just so much more energy and action involved with it.
Marco Rubio says that a Donald Trump nomination would fracture the Republican Party, but I don't have your political chops, John, but it seems to me that is that a bit of fear-mongering in the sense that, like, if Donald Trump is the nominee, a lot of Republicans are going to line up behind him. There's not going to be a fracturing. Well,
there are a lot of Republicans who don't want to vote for Donald Trump. But will it cause, what would cause the crack up is if they get to the convention and there's an attempt to try and take his delegates away from him or somebody else comes out ahead. I think that would create. But if we step back and look historically at the crack ups in parties, if you look at 1964 on the Republican side, you had people like Nelson Rockefeller and George Romney saying they would not support the nominee of the party. You had a convention in which a number of the speeches at the convention were condemnations of the extremist wing of the Republican Party at the very convention. You had the convention reading the rules to knock out of prime time the speakers who were going to say critical things about members of the party. That's what chaos looks like. We're not anywhere close to that yet. So in our modern system, this looks like it's chaotic, but we're not close to the real chaos situation. Now, we could get there if, when we get to Cleveland, there's an effort to try and rearrange the delegates. And so we may get there, but we're not close yet.
So looking to next week, Utah, Arizona, I want to talk about both the Democrats and the Republicans, but we'll start with the Republicans. We're talking about them. You know, to solve all of this, Donald Trump could just get the majority of the delegates, right? And so looking to next week, does it look favorable for him?
Well, actually, polls in Arizona look a little softer for him than you might have expected. That's a state that he went to early. He talked about the border there. It's obviously a border state. He's very talked a lot about immigration and is strong on securing the border. He has as he will tell you, the endorsement of Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who is a very outspoken member of the state. So it's a little softer than you would have guessed, but we'll just have to see how things turn out. One thing that's interesting is you hear these GOP officials, and Paul Ryan's one of them, talk about how they're preparing for a contested convention. if they didn't want a contested convention, they would say, well, that's a long way in the future and we'll get there when we get there. When they say they're reading up on contested conventions and they're preparing in contingency, what they're really saying is we want a contested convention, which is kind of striking to have members in the organizational leadership wing of the party saying, yes, we'd like a big, ugly fight, because a big, ugly fight is preferable to the alternative.
Wow.